Well, I am so excited about today's podcast episode. I got my buddy in town, Stuart Hall. Thanks so much for being with me, Stuart.
Greatest honor.
Yeah, I know you're thrilled to death.
No, I'm being sincere. Why? Don't downgrade my compliment.
Never. Now, let me introduce you, Stuart, to our listening and watching audience, because it's on YouTube as well. Stuart Hall, when I was growing up, I'm taking you back to 1995, 1996.
Oh, my goodness.
Bossier City, Louisiana. First of all, well, let me set the context. Stuart Hall was the student pastor at First Baptist Church, Bossier City. He was so cool that he dropped the youth pastor tag. He was the student pastor. We were in that transition. And I went to a church across town, but everybody knew about First Baptist Church student ministry. Stuart he had the happening ministry, all of the kids on Wednesday night. It was the big church. And Open Eyes was the band. Wasn't it Open Eyes?
It was Open Eyes.
Yes, Open Eyes was the band. I mean, it was awesome. And from an influence standpoint, I would tell people, I would say Stuart Hall, top 5 influence in my life. And when we talk about the Forward podcast, this is all about helping people move forward in the walk with the Lord. Mm-hmm. And as it relates to moving forward in my walk with the Lord at a critical time in my life, Stuart, no lie, man, you're at the top of the list. I just want to say thank you publicly. I said it privately, but publicly, man, for investing in me, for being a role model. Stuart, for those that might not be familiar with Stuart's ministry, I mean, can preach, the dynamic communicator. And I can just remember as a student, junior, senior year, high school, just sitting on the edge of my chair every time you spoke, every time you taught, just inspiring, challenging, and really helped me grow deeper in my walk with the Lord.
I got actually tickled today in staff meeting because the reality is I wasn't that much older than you.
That's crazy to think about.
It's crazy to think about, but it wasn't as
How old were you?
I think when we moved there, I was 25.
So what brought you, because you've been leading students and being a part of student ministry, speaking into student ministry events, camps, mm-hmm. conferences, building up student ministries for nearly 40 years now. Mm-hmm. To kind of tell our audience your journey. Like I would love to, you had a great relationship with your parents growing up in Alabama. Just kind of tell your journey and get us to Bossier City.
Yeah, so I was a high school academic All-American in football and basketball. I was a jock.
Academic All-American or athletic All-American?
Academic.
Oh, okay.
But it was in basketball and football, so
yeah.
They have that even in college.
Yeah.
But that basically means I was smart, but
mm-hmm.
I wasn't that athletic is what it means. Played basketball in college, had a very underwhelming career.
University of Alabama?
My freshman year, and then University of Mobile is where I finished.
Yep.
That's why people have never heard of me, because my career was – ever heard of me? Exactly.
Hey, I tell people, listen, my dream was to play college football, and if any coach would have asked me to, I would have played. None of them did, man.
That's right. The older I get, the better I was.
At least you played, man. At least you played.
Wanted to – I really did. I wanted to work for ESPN. I was a communications major in college, but I started following Jesus between my freshman and sophomore year in college.
Okay.
FCA was a big part of my spiritual formation. I transferred after my freshman year at Alabama to a small NAIA school. It was only their second year of having a basketball program. And I wound up being really the only faithful believer on the team. We would have chapel every Wednesday, and we had an FCA guy that would come in, and he had no choice but to disciple me because I was the only one to show up.
Who was that, Stuart?
A guy named Greg Davidson. His name.
You still in contact with him?
No, I've lost contact with Greg, but he's a great dude. It's actually the way I actually started communicating too, because by the end of that year, he would take me to like middle school and high school at FCAs and go, "Hey, tell your story." But before my senior year, the plan was for me to go play with athletes in action between my junior and senior year. And the church that I was attending, I went to be a small group leader at their camp. And I had a bunk house full of 8th graders or middle school boys, and it just wrecked me. Wow. And I was like, I think this is what I'm supposed to do with my life. Because more than anything, Jarrett, I saw myself in them. Mm-hmm. You could not pay me to go back to middle school. There's no amount of money. And I think part of that is, you're awkward and you can't do anything about it. But just hearing their stories, and that's really how God kind of broke my heart, and I decided not to go and play with the Philippines. And by the end of that year, it's a really interesting story. There was a guy who was a senior adult pastor at a mega church in Mobile. So my first staff experience was a mega church without a pastor. The senior adult pastor, we don't have a youth pastor. Would you come and work for the summer? And the plan was at the time to go to seminary afterwards. And so literally my first 4 months, or actually my first 2 years, we didn't have a pastor. The senior adult guy was my direct report. And I made so many mistakes, but they gave me so much grace.
Yeah.
And that's really how my local church youth ministry and the process of that, I worked part-time with FCA, served there. And then from Mobile, we moved to Louisiana for 5 years.
Wow. When did you meet Kelly? Kelly, your wife, when did you meet her?
We got in an argument in an ethics class my senior year.
So she was at Alabama, Birmingham,
She
Mobile.
was in Mobile. Yeah. We got in an argument in an ethics class.
And that's how it all started.
Yeah. That's how it all started. And
where's Kelly from?
Kelly's from Mobile, but she was from the bougie side of town.
Okay, so what? And I mean, I just kept trying to think of y'all moving from Alabama to Bossier City, Louisiana.
Well, as I mentioned, we were without a pastor. Eventually, they hired a pastor at the church where I was serving in Mobile, and he brought his entire staff. Okay. So it's like a corporate takeover.
Yeah, sure.
And they gave me a choice: you can stay and be the new student pastor's associate, or you can go find a place. And I really felt like I had a lot to learn. So I'm like, hey, I'll be his associate. It was the most miserable 9 months of my life because I had invested so much time in
and you've
students.
been leading. Yeah. That's hard.
And so during that time, I'm like, I'm getting the itch to do this on my own. And some friends contacted me from there. And
there's this amazing church by the Pierre Bossier Mall.
Yeah, exactly. Shreveport Bossier is not a destination but it wound up being the best. We would not trade that 5 years for
You were there 5 years.
There 5 years.
Amazing,
and
man.
As you mentioned, like God just did.
Amazing.
It was unbelievable.
It really was, man. There was nothing like those Wednesday nights.
I think a lot of it was the season of culture that we were in, because I tell young student leaders now, you really didn't have to do that much.
Yeah.
We did have cool music.
Yeah.
We had pretty girls.
Yeah.
And
there's something in the water on that north side of Bossier.
That's right.
During those years.
But man, Jesus did a lot and the other part, not only did Jesus do a lot of cool stuff, but I think the thing that I am the most encouraged by is the lives that teenagers from there are living now as adults.
Yeah.
That's the thing I get fired up about.
Well, I will be forever grateful. I'm serving as FCA president and trying to reach my classmates for Jesus. I was really passionate that senior year and wanting to have an event and calling you to come over. I didn't know what it entailed. And will you come speak and bring the band and whatever, man, y'all did that. I didn't pay a dime, and God moved on our campus, tons of kids giving their life to Jesus. And for you to come alongside, invest in me like that, believe in me like that, man, just unbelievable. And
there's I appreciate you saying that, but there's some people that just have it, and you have always had it. Wow. And I'm glad I get to formally on record say that you've always had it. And that was a perfect example, because you're like, who cares how we do it? We just need to do it. Yeah. And like people follow people like that. You are a leader worth following.
Well, I'm grateful for you. And then we got to reconnect. So I go off to school at Ouachita Baptist University, and you moved to Atlanta. Mm-hmm. And so I go to school, moved to Dallas, and there's a huge singles Bible study that I'm responsible for leading at the time. And I'm thinking, I've got to get a speaker for this, because the guy who kind of built it had stepped off, and we had all these different guys coming in and out, and we needed consistency. I just remember going, we need consistency. Who can I ask? And like number one on the list was Stuart Hall. So I remember calling you, and I mean, every week. How long did we do that? You flew in from Atlanta every Sunday night.
Right. Yeah. I think it lasted. I want to say 4 or 5. I didn't do it more than a year because of September the 11th.
Yeah, that's right. And that's where I was going with that is you were coming in every Sunday night or Monday, and the Bible study was Monday night, and then you'd fly out early Tuesday morning. It was awesome. We saw God move.
Unbelievable. And we started rebuilding because it was
right.
a rebuild.
That's right.
More
and
than anything.
This little unknown band, Mercy Me, was doing music. And Stuart speaking, and it really was awesome. And I just loved being able to pick you up from the airport. You know, this is before the days of Uber.
That's
so
right.
I was your Uber.
You were my Uber.
I was.
That and Saltgrass is the
Saltgrass. Man, we should have gone to lunch there while you were in town.
We had quite deep theological, functional, practical discussions about what it means to be on church, be on church staff, follow Jesus, getting married.
Yeah. You were I was telling my wife Debbie earlier. I was saying, "Hey, Stuart's going to be in town," and I remember you told me, this is profound. You said, "Jarrett, you really one of the reasons you need to marry her. One of them is you judge. You don't even remember this. You judge beauty. How do they look in a baseball hat?" And you was like, "Debbie's pretty in a baseball hat, man." You had no idea that you don't.
It's crazy that you're saying that because I told Kelly last week you could wear cutoff shorts, a T-shirt, and a baseball hat, and I would be all about it.
You told me that, and I was like, "She does look good in a hat, so let's get married." And so we've been married 22 years this past week that we're recording this.
There's something to it.
So I remember, though, that 911. So we're doing that Monday night Bible study. I take you to the airport on Tuesday, September the 11th, 2001, and you're in the air when all that was going on. Go back in your mind. Like, I think that's interesting because everybody knows that's of age where they were when that happened. What was that like?
Well, you and I, for everybody watching and listening, we reconnect every September the 11th, whether it's just simply a text to let you know. I text you and I text Reed Dickens. Amazing. Those are the two people.
Yeah, because Reed was in the White House.
That's right.
I remember that.
I text you too every September the 11th. The part that is eerie about the story, this was before the days where you could be on your phone in the air. So if you're young, there were days, there was a day when you travel. First of all, you could walk directly to the gate and not have to go through security. Yeah. And also, you weren't allowed to use your phone. So cell phones were just starting to gain traction. The thing I remember the most, one, we were in a holding pattern for almost an hour and a half around Atlanta. Reed told me later that the CDC was a thought to be target. So that was part of the reason we were in a holding pattern. My wife was freaking out because I was supposed to be on the ground and she's watching what's transpiring on television.
Did the pilot say anything? Do y'all know what's going on? So no, you don't even know what's going on.
We're in a holding pattern. The indelible memory I have is once we parked at the gate and we could turn on our phones and you could hear like a wave of phones coming on and the prompts of voicemails and people listening to voicemails on speaker, people on phones gasping, people crying. Atlanta was and is the busiest airport in America. I walked out onto the concourse and there's not a soul. Everybody had gathered in the bars and restaurants to be around televisions. And by the time I got down to baggage claim, the National Guard was running in to commandeer the airport. And the thing I remember the most is walking underneath the parking. My car was parked underneath like a parking deck and weeping because I thought, like, if they hit this parking deck, you have every thought. I drove directly to our son's preschool.
Yeah, your kids were young at that time.
And got him out of school.
Wow.
And we just stayed in front of the television the rest of the time.
Unbelievable.
And then a couple of months later, I was in D.C., or in the D.C. area, and Reed said, "Hey, come to the White House and I'll give you a tour." And this was months later, there were snipers everywhere,
such a crazy time.
Just a crazy time. Yeah. But I made up my mind at that point, and I think this is a good lesson for all of us. Like, I'm not unique as a communicator. I appreciate the way you try to hype me up, but the only place I'm unique is first, and I intend to be only husband to Kelly and Grant Chandler.
You've always been that way, bro. Your family has always been priority.
Grant Chandler.
That's something you can say about Stuart Hall.
I am daddy to Grant Chandler and Cameron. so why, like, I can remember having this really difficult discussion with you because 722 and Metro Bible Study were the things.
Yeah.
And I would tell my friends, I'm not going to do it anymore. And they were like, are you crazy?
Yeah.
You replaced me so fast. And not only did you replace me, but you replaced me with somebody better because one Matt Chandler took over.
That's right.
And he crushed it. I hope that what I learned from that is like, I can find something else to do.
Yeah.
We can go run skating rinks and bowling alleys to reach people. But man,
we go to Skate Bossier. We go back and do that. Holiday Lane.
Yeah. Two things will never die, skating and bowling.
Yeah.
But you only get one shot to be a parent, and every one of us who are married should desire to be the best spouse we can be.
Yeah, you've modeled that well, man. That's always been a kind of a core tenet in your life and the example that you've set. And you've talked about it openly. So totally respect
one of my mentors was a big part of that because he you choose to cheat. There's not enough hours for us to do everything.
Yeah.
So why give yourself to places where you're not, none of us are, if you're a businessman, businesswoman, you think you're unique in your position, quit.
Yeah.
And see how quickly they replace you.
Yeah,
you're not unique.
Yeah. It's like that hand in the water bucket. You know, that you just stick your hand in a water bucket and take your hand out, and the hole that's remaining is how much you're going to be missed.
That's exactly right. And I'm able to, I never missed, our son played football in high school and in college. I didn't miss one single high school football game,
awesome,
even though I was on the road a ton.
Yeah.
I was lucky with the girls because they were playing sports where you play so many games. They're like, you can miss a couple, but they know Dad.
Yeah.
And that was really
huge,
important
man.
to me. Yeah.
It's huge. So catch our audience up on what you've been doing, for the past really 20 plus years. I know you've been speaking at conferences and camps and investing in student leaders, but what does that look like practically? Catch us up.
Well, the reality is that we are in a very interesting time and have been in a very interesting time in faith communities across the country because investing in the next generation is a very difficult thing. You and I were chatting at lunch that there's this growing chasm between experienced what you and I call OG youth leaders and then a very brand new generation of leaders. And the chasm is in the middle because there have been so many new churches that have been planted and men and women who would have had used youth ministry to gain ministry chops or, becoming campus pastors and lead pastors. So there is a definite void. What I have been doing for the last 16 years more than that, 20 years, you're right, is trying to fill some of those spots because I don't think this is a secret. Next generation ministry and specifically middle school and high school ministries are the most difficult ministries of the church.
Why do you say that?
Because I think teenagers experience so many life-altering things at a time where they are finally able to put their mind map around the idea of a holy God, purpose. Why am I on the planet? What is sovereignty? So that you have deep theological issues coupled with life, and they now have the capacity. A middle schooler moves from. They can't even think. A middle schooler can't think an abstract thought until puberty starts. But once puberty starts, things move from concrete to extremely abstract, and then you couple that with all of the things that they experience, and then you couple that today with we just spent 40 minutes talking about what's happening in culture and how it affects the next generation. So what I've been trying to do for the last 13 years as a local church youth pastor, but for the last 20, trying to stand in the gap for youth leaders and help understand culture, student culture, understand child development, because way too often I think we pathologize and theologize just simple development. And sometimes what's happening with your teenager is just a part of them growing up, and we want to hyper spiritualize it when they are just growing up. And moms and dads were not born moms and dads, so we have to help them understand that. And then, you stand up in front of 6 or 7 generations every Sunday. Most youth leaders have not been trained to be the sociologist, psychologist, parent whisperer, cheerleader, theologian.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, their task is monumental. And generally speaking, churches in America hand it over to 20-something year olds.
Yeah.
So the older that I've gotten, what I pray I can be is an advocate and a teammate to that younger leader, just helping them. The farther down the road you get, the better that you can see. You've been to the future.
Yeah.
So you can help a young leader be better.
So you've got parents listening to this podcast, Stuart, of young kids and teenagers. I mean, off the top of your head, what would be 2 or 3 things that you would tell them? I know we can't get super deep into this, but what would be 2 or 3 things off the top of your head to say, be proactive about or think about as you're leading your teenager, not just dropping them off at church, obviously, and handing them over to the church, to the disciple. And we try to tell our parents that they are the primary discipler, that we're to come alongside and want to come alongside. But for parents listening, what would you tell them to just be thinking about, to be engaged in the life of their student? Because our parents listen, they want their kids to love Jesus and to grow up, character forming in their heart. And what would you tell them?
Yeah, the first one is a pretty big challenge for every mom and dad, regardless of where you are in your own personal spiritual walk, in your own journey with Jesus. You have been, are, and will always be the primary spiritual influence in the life of your child. Mm. Your teenager is taking their theological spiritual cues from you.
Mm.
Tozer is famous for saying the most important thing about you is what you think about when you think about God.
Yep.
I would propose that what moms and dads help students do is this idea that what God thinks about when he thinks about us determines what you think about when you think about God, and they take their cues about how God thinks about them by how their parents from mom and dad.
Man.
So, religion is, I've messed up. Oh God, I hope my father doesn't find out. An authentic, real relationship with Jesus is, oh, I've messed up. I got to go talk to my dad.
Yeah, beautiful.
And those are the things that I hope mom and dad understand, that it's so much more caught than it is taught. They are taking their spiritual cues from us.
Yeah.
The second thing I would say is that everything is spiritual. And unfortunately, we live in the Western church, and specifically the American church, we tend to segment things like that's a church thing, that's a Jesus thing, and then there's real life.
Yeah.
Everything is spiritual. And if there is a way that we can help our children understand that how you interact with your friends, who you are as a student, who you are in the band, who you are in the theater, who you are as an athlete, all those things are deeply, deeply spiritual. At the very core of who you are a spiritual being. You are not a body who's trying to figure out how to be spiritual. You are deeply spiritual, trying to figure out how to be the best human version of the soul that you are. Mm-hmm. One of the ways that we try to help our children understand that, our youngest played soccer at the University of Florida. I use this as an illustration often. Dead religion is Cameron sitting in church thinking about playing soccer. Mm. A live, active faith is Cameron playing soccer, figuring out, how do I make much of Jesus while I do this?
Yeah.
We can help our children understand that by the way we see everything as deeply spiritual.
That's good.
Those would be 2, 3 immediate things, I think.
Yeah, isn't it amazing? Like, I was talking to our church recently, just talking about their pursuit of the Lord. And one of the things that I told them specifically about seeking intimacy with the Lord is think relationship. Mm-hmm. Think relationship. You get over to that to-do list, checklist, religion, as you call it. I mean, Jesus' harshest words were for the religious people who went to church all the time, knew all of the verses, had the law memorized, but their heart was far from the Lord. And I just think when we go into enter into our time with the Lord, whatever it looks like, we've got to be thinking relationship. That's what it is. That's what it is.
We heard this message Sunday, and it was one of the woes where Jesus is like, "Woe to you."
Mm-hmm.
What were there 7 of those?
Yeah.
7 or 9 of those, and this one was about you. You build these memorials to these prophets that were killed, and the way that the pastor framed this was what Jesus was saying is, I think it was Zechariah that had been murdered, and they had built like a memorial, and the religious leaders then were going, we would have never done that when we were alive. And Jesus' woe to them was, the way you live now tells me how you would have lived then.
Yeah. Yep.
And we do that because we all have lived through times where I can't believe, Jesus people allowed that to happen. Well, the best predictor of what you would have done in the past is what you're doing now.
Yeah.
So we are sending a signal to our students in how we interact with, what it means to be a person of the way.
Yeah.
And showing them what the way of Jesus looks like is so incredibly important because they catch it.
Yeah.
They catch it.
Well, you've been a voice in that student ministry realm to student leaders, and I'd encourage parents to how do they follow you, Stuart, in your ministry? Like, what are your handles on Instagram or your website?
It's so narcissistic.
No, I know, but I'm asking because people want resources.
Yeah,
and they need it.
I do a lot of writing now on Substack, and my Substack is I Am Stuart Hall. And
I Am Stuart Hall.
Is Stuart.
Yeah. So to the parents listening, I can't recommend Stuart highly enough. I had him come in and speak with our student ministry team. Did our staff chapel, just talking about reaching the next generation. Really, really good. I want to go another direction here. Okay. I want to get personal, if that's okay, because you've always been a very deep thinker. You've always asked great questions.
Always got on your nerves.
Oh yeah, I'm really shallow, and you always want to go deep.
No, we would have amazing tension points. Well, those are some of my best memories about Steakhouse.
Yeah,
with we would get after it.
I don't know how to answer that, Stuart. But you went through an episode in your life, specifically during COVID, where, no else say it. I mean, you almost died. You were in a coma, and I want to for our audience listening, you can't go through something like you went through without it being deeply formative and doing something in you. Fill us in. I want to fill the audience in on the story, and then I want to know, what are your top 1 or 2 takeaways that God just wrecked you, taught you, burned in you through that experience? Because that's an experience, man.
Yeah. I contracted COVID the latter part of March 2020 when it was just breaking in the United States. Got progressively worse. This is the Cliff Notes version, and then was my wife and son had to rush me to the hospital first part of April. Was immediately intubated.
This is in the beginning. Nobody even knew what we were.
Correct.
They didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, I was telling you at lunch. The hospital where I went didn't even have enough tests the first time that I went to even test me.
Yeah, and it's not like you're in the backwoods. You're in big city Atlanta, Georgia.
Right.
So,
my wife was told. I've had to be told this because I was out of it once they intubated me. But I was having a COVID-induced heart attack when they rushed me to the hospital. And I want to be clear. It's interesting when I talk about COVID because if you're a COVID denier, I'm your worst nightmare because I would love to introduce you to all my doctors.
Yeah, you lived through it.
And if you believe in the power of prayer, I'm also an unbelievable testimony to what that miracles still happen and prayer works. But I had a COVID-induced heart attack, meaning that the virus attacked my blood and caused severe clotting, and one of those clots got into my heart, and that's what caused the heart attack. So stayed in a coma for almost a month, and several times that was very precarious. My pastor talks about, preparing for a funeral. My wife and our kids have, they experienced Kelly.
So sobering.
Yeah, Kelly and the kids experienced all the trauma. I was like Rip Van Winkle. I went to sleep and woke up like, what's up?
What's going on?
Yeah. But it's extremely traumatic and not fun to talk about. And I also understand, I want to be very sensitive to anyone watching and listening. There's someone who prayed for a loved one that didn't live.
One of my mentors, Rod Masteller, died of COVID in the hospital. So you're right.
So that is a big part of what's shifted in me. And Kelly, and our kids taught me this, because I think it's changed the way we pray. We no longer pray. We pray this way: God, we believe that you can, and we are asking that you will, as opposed to the demands we tend to put on God for things He's never promised us. Yeah. God does not promise us that He will heal us.
Say that again, just so our people listening don't have to rewind.
Yeah. God, we believe that you can. We believe that you are able. We are asking that you will. Yeah, as opposed to, God, we believe that you can, and we know you're going to.
Yeah.
God did not promise Kelly and our kids, nor me, that He would heal me. Yeah. His word says He can, but it doesn't promise that He will. In fact, the writer of Hebrews said, what you can be assured of is He will give you grace and mercy. Yeah. But those aren't the things we want. What we want is an assurance that He's going to live. We want. Yeah, that's a big one. I also am fundamentally convinced that the universal supreme ethic of the Spirit of God is love. And it is the thread that runs through everything. And I think that that is why Jesus' message was so revolutionary, because it wasn't the message of the day. There was so much of a karma idea that if I would have gotten sick in the first century, people would have gone, well, what did his parents or what did he do?
Yeah.
And, the pandemic and COVID would have been seen as a plague, and it would have been about the punishment of God. But I think where I am starting to settle is that because God loves, there have been things put into motion that sometimes we pray to ask God for things that He would have to go back and take love off the table for those things to actually be able to happen.
I told those listening that you're deep, that you're gonna have to go back and listen to that again and just take that apart. That's good. Did you struggle, Stuart, with any anger toward the Lord or bitterness toward the Lord, or any why questions toward the Lord as you were coming out of that coma and dealing with that? Did any of that go through your mind?
I am very aware of how wretched of a person I am. I have never asked why. Well, let me rephrase that. I have asked why. Why did I live? I've never asked why did I get sick.
Yeah.
But I have asked. I mean, Wade Morris, who was a hero to me.
Sure.
Crazy. By the way, a marathon runner.
Yeah.
So for everybody,
you weren't running marathons,
but I was very healthy.
You and Kelly always have been.
So that's the thing that people always say. Well, he must have been unhealthy. Well,
no, he was.
Yeah. In fact, all the doctors have said the only reason I lived was because of how healthy I was. But Wade and I would talk all the time about coaching our kids. Yeah. And
God, he was a good guy.
And that's where the why is for me. Why did I the other thing that's interesting, and this maybe get a little controversial, and I apologize if this offends anybody, but well-meaning people would always say things to Kelly and our kids like, he's going to have such an amazing testimony. Can't wait to, this is indicting on us as people of faith. I can't wait till he writes a book. As if the immediate reaction is, let's commodify the miracle. And I just, first of all, I'm incredibly humbled and grateful that I lived. I just want to love Kelly and our kids more. I have zero interest in monetizing a miracle. And that should be a check for all of us that, well, that was a miracle. Therefore, there's going to be, a movie or a book to come out. We've missed it if that's where we've gotten. But no, I don't think about why at all. Yeah. Especially our youngest daughter had a teammate at Florida whose both of her parents were physicians in New York at Ground Zero for Ground Zero for the pandemic. And I watched them very lovingly but sternly correct another set of parents on our team who were deniers. And they were saying it was like Armageddon, the death that we were experiencing. to hear them talk about it and to know that I somehow, I mean, I'll make it even closer to home. We live in North Atlanta. By random chance, Kelly picked the hospital that she picked. She picked the closest one that she knew of, that she sped to at 1:00 in the morning to get me there. And I wound up being, for a while, the only COVID patient on the ICU floor. And I would have 5 or 6 doctors in attendance for me. But you go to Grady Hospital downtown Atlanta, and people were dying right and left because they didn't have enough physicians for the number of people who were getting sick. Mm. So that in and of itself, like, how can you ask why?
Yeah.
That, like, there's a privilege connected to that I'm not comfortable with.
What about for Kelly? What do you think? What if she was sitting here and I asked her, what if I said, what are the two or three things that, God imprinted in your heart through this? What would she say?
Man, she just begged God for my life.
She did too, man. I remember she's begging people to pray, and
she tells a story that I don't think I can tell without, losing it. But at one point in that time when I was in a coma, they tried to extubate me, and I got irritated. They intubated me again, and then one night I threw up. I vomited in the ventilator, and my whole body went septic. And that was the Monday that I was telling you about at lunch, where they were standing around my body going, we don't know what else to do. And she tells a story how she got up early that morning when she got the call from the nurse of what had happened. Because that's the other thing to remember, is she couldn't be at the hospital.
Yeah.
And she went out on the porch and just basically said, "You can have him." Mm. Knowing how, like, I would not trade my relationship with my wife for anything, knowing how much that took for her to go, like, I don't want to do this, but I'm open-handed with my husband. And she has this amazing Bob Goff quote that maybe, do you have footnotes or show notes for this podcast?
Yeah, sure. We'll make it happen.
There's an amazing, I don't remember the whole quote, but it's just like, what are you, like, you're waiting between the moments, like, for God to show up. And she was like, I knew I was in between. Man. Like, will he show up? Will he do something? So I think God showed her himself in a way that has really flipped her life upside down. She sees God in a completely different way. I would tell you, I would be less than honest if I didn't tell you that the response of people during that time really caused her, our children, and myself. The term deconstruction is a very interesting term, but we all, like, if you thought something about God before and you think differently about him now, you've deconstructed in some way. I think they've had some serious reframings of the God that they thought was true. Yeah. And a lot of that, to be candid, were the responses of people during a time where, I always bring this to the forefront. Total strangers, men and women in the medical community, were risking their life to save my life. And people were taking such ridiculously cruel cheap shots because we wanted to politicize the issue. Yeah. That has caused a lot of hurt with Kelly and our kids. But, God's faithful, and Jesus is real, and they've hankered in him, and they're good. Well,
when you were telling that story about Kelly, and you mentioned Tozer earlier, he has a chapter in his book, The Pursuit of God, which I would encourage anybody to read. It's probably the most formative book in my life outside the Bible. But there's a chapter, I think it's chapter 3, it's called The Blessedness of Possessing Nothing. And that was kind of, and he talks about Abraham, who, or he was talking about the life of Abraham, but he's talking about his own life, how he had all sons and he had this baby girl, and he just couldn't turn her over to the Lord. He just couldn't do it. And he was wrestling with the Lord one day, and finally he just kind of, God, she's yours. And he calls that chapter the blessedness of possessing nothing. And I just thought of that phrase when you were talking about.
Have you ever heard the story? Like, Tozer deserves the flowers we give him.
Yeah.
But have you ever heard the quote from his wife about?
I have. It's heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking, but I think it's a great message to us all.
Tell it, because you model it with the way that you have set up boundaries to say family first, and that's going to be the priority. This is, say it. I know exactly where you're going.
So A.W. Tozer passed away, I think, in his 60s, maybe. Yep. And his wife's name was Ada. A.W.'s first name was Aiden. That was a very confusing relationship.
I was going to name one of my children Aiden, and Debbie vetoed. So we ain't naming no Aiden. No offense to Aiden's listening.
But several years later, just a few years later, Ada, the widow, married one of A.W.'s good friends. Right. And several years after they had been married for several years, someone asked her, "How are you doing with remarriage?" And she said, "It's been the best time of my life. Aiden, A.W., loved Jesus, but I can't remember his name. My new husband loves me."
Yep.
Aiden loved Jesus. My new husband loves me.
Yeah.
And that, I think it points to what I was saying during staff today, that God measures the health, depth, and maturity of our relationship with him vertically, by our relationships with people horizontally. And there was a generation that believed at all costs.
Yeah. You take care of the church, got to take care of your family.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, that haunts me.
Yeah.
I always want to remember that the best way that I love God is by loving Kelly and our kids.
Man, that's a good place to end. Just that challenge. And Stuart,
Jarrett, I love Jarrett.
Thank you so much, Stuart. And so good, dude, having you here and just getting to visit with you. Thanks for being on today and sharing a little bit of your heart and what you're doing.
Well, you are a leader worth following, and I mean that sincerely. Thank you for the example you're setting for us old dudes.
Thanks, bro.